Imagine the sound first. Not silence, not the calm you'd expect in the misty streets of Roman Britain, but a thunder of voices, tens of hundreds of throats, shouting, cheering, jeering, a sound that rises like a wave, crashing against stone walls and rattling across the wooden seats of an amphitheater. Now imagine the smell of damp earth and wet cloaks mingling with something far heavier, sweat, blood, fear, soldiers and townsfolk, rich merchants and slaves, all crammed together, eager for one thing, spectacle. And then imagine what you see. A man, stripped to the waist, sand stuck to his skin, his chest rising and falling with short, sharp breaths. He is young, perhaps not much older than 30, his eyes darting nervously as he waits. He knows what is coming. The crowd knows what is coming. Everyone knows. The iron gate at the far end groans as it begins to rise. From behind it, a growl. Not a dog, not a wolf, something deeper. A rumble from a chest built for killing. The man's fists clench, his shoulders tighten. He is not in Rome, not in the Colosseum. He is in York, and the beast about to emerge has crossed oceans and deserts to meet him in this arena on the far edge of the Roman world. This is not a story of Rome's capital, but of its frontier. It is the story of a gladiator, or perhaps a condemned man, thrown to lions in 3rd century York. And astonishingly, it is a story we can still trace today, not from written words, but from bones. A skeleton uncovered by archaeologists, scarred with bite marks that could only belong to a lion. So settle in, because what we're about to explore is one of the most haunting intersections of archaeology, history, and human cruelty that Britain has ever revealed. Before we begin, welcome to the channel. We bring forgotten corners of history back to life, piece by piece, bone by bone. If you love stories that make the past breathe again, don't forget to subscribe, because the further we dig, the stranger it gets. When you hear Rome, what do you picture? Maybe gleaming marble temples, senators in white togas, the Colosseum towering over the city's skyline. But the truth is, Rome was not just a city, it was an empire. And that empire stretched so far that its roads and legions reached all the way to the damp, windswept north of Britain. There, the Romans built a city, Iberacum. Today, we call it York. To the Roman military, York was more than just another provincial town. It was the capital of northern Britain, a vital stronghold guarding the frontiers from restless tribes. Stationed here were the legions, the backbone of Roman power. Soldiers marched its streets, officers commanded from its barracks, and traders arrived with goods that had traveled halfway across the known world. It wasn't a sleepy outpost. It was alive, crowded, diverse. Imagine it. Stone walls rising against the gray sky, tiled roofs steaming after rain, smoke curling from bathhouses, and the bustle of markets where Latin mingled with Celtic and Germanic tongues. Even emperors found their way here. Septimius Severus, the North African-born emperor who had fought his way to the throne, made York his base in the early 3rd century while campaigning in Scotland. His presence turned the city into a temporary capital of the Roman world. Think about that. York, cold and muddy, once ruled the empire, if only for a season. But with empire came culture, and with culture came entertainment. The Romans were famous not just for their engineering and their laws, but for their appetite for spectacle. To them, a city wasn't complete without an amphitheater, a place where people could gather, where Rome could show its dominance, not just in politics, but in the theater of death. So yes, York had an amphitheater, perhaps not as massive as the Colosseum, but still large enough to echo with the noise of thousands of voices. Soldiers, civilians, traders, locals, all drawn together, side by side, for the same grisly entertainment. Now pause for a moment and picture it. You're a local Briton, born in this land before Rome arrived. Maybe your parents still tell stories of freedom, of fighting legions in the forests. And now, here you are, in an amphitheater built by your conquerors. You sit surrounded by their soldiers, their banners flying above you. And before your eyes, you see something you never dreamed possible. A lion. Yes, a lion, here, in Britain. Not carved on a shield, not painted on a wall, but real, flesh and blood. Its mane bristling, its jaws dripping saliva, its roar shaking the air. How could such a creature end up here, thousands of miles from Africa? That's part of Rome's power. Rome didn't just conquer lands, it imported them. Across its empire stretched networks of trade and transport. From Africa, lions were captured, caged, and shipped across seas. From Gaul, they were marched along Roman roads, and somehow, some way, they ended up in Britain, in places like Chester, London, and yes, York. For the people of Aberacom, seeing one of these creatures was like seeing a monster from another world. They had wolves here, sure, bears, yes, but nothing like this. The lion wasn't just an animal, it was a symbol of Rome's reach, Rome's power, Rome's ability to command the very beasts of the earth. And into this arena, into this theater of fear and awe, men were thrown. Sometimes gladiators, sometimes condemned criminals, sometimes rebels. One of them, we now know, did not walk away. The Roman games were not just about gladiators fighting gladiators. That's the image we often carry, to men with swords clashing beneath the sun. But the truth is, Roman entertainment was much broader and often much darker. There were the Munerish gladiatorial combats. There were the Naumachia mock naval battles, sometimes even staged in flooded arenas. And then there were the Venatians, beast hunts. The Venatians were perhaps the most exotic, the most theatrical. They showed Rome's control over the natural world. Imagine hunters entering the arena dressed in elaborate costumes, armed with spears and nets, facing down creatures dragged from faraway lands. Leopards, panthers, elephants, even crocodiles. Sometimes the hunters killed them. Sometimes the animals killed the hunters. Either way, the crowd roared its approval. But there was another, more chilling use of animals in the games: executions. The Romans called it damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. This was no sport, no contest. It was punishment turned into entertainment. Criminals, rebels, deserters, or enemies of the state could be sentenced to die in the arena, not by sword or spear, but by being thrown to wild animals. Can you imagine the spectacle? The condemned, often unarmed, sometimes naked, stumbling into the sand. The gate creaks open. Out charges a lion, its mane bristling, its claws tearing the ground. The man runs, screams, begs, but the crowd laughs. This was not horror to the Romans. This was justice. Now, you might be wondering, how did lions, actual lions, find their way into the damp, gray world of Britain? The answer is staggering. Rome maintained an entire logistical network just to supply these games. Lions were captured in North Africa, often in what is now Algeria or Tunisia. They were trapped, caged, and shipped across the Mediterranean to ports in Italy or Gaul. From there, they were marched overland, carted in wagons, sometimes chained and dragged, until they reached the amphitheaters of the empire. Think of the effort, the resources, the sheer cruelty it took, all so that citizens in Rome or soldiers in York could watch a man and a lion tear each other apart. And in York, in the 3rd century, this exact spectacle unfolded. We know this not from some poet's description, not from a dusty scroll, but from the most direct evidence possible: bones. A skeleton uncovered that bore marks no sword, no spear, no human weapon could make. Marks that tell us a lion stood in that arena, and a man fell to it. The discovery began, like many archaeological stories do, with a dig, careful hands brushing away layers of soil, uncovering fragments of the past. But what they found was no ordinary skeleton. It was a man, perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s. The bones were surprisingly well preserved, considering they had lain beneath the earth for nearly 1,700 years. But what caught the archaeologists' eyes were the wounds. Not sword cuts, not arrowheads lodged in bone. These were different. There were puncture marks, deep, ragged, crushing. They were too wide to be from knives, too irregular to be from spears. The spacing, the depth, the tearing pattern, all matched one thing: the bite of a big cat, specifically a lion. Forensic analysis confirmed it. The spacing between the puncture wounds lined up with the canines of a lion's jaws. The crushing damage showed the immense force such an animal could exert. These were not glancing injuries, they were life-ending wounds. Think about what that means. In Roman Britain, in York, a man had been mauled to death by a lion. This wasn't a metaphor, this wasn't a myth, it happened. But who was this man? That's where the story grows murky. Archaeology gives us bones, but bones don't come with names. Was he a gladiator? A trained fighter sent into the arena with a chance, however slim, to face the beast? Or was he a condemned man, a rebel, a thief, a deserter, thrown to the lions as a public warning? Both are possible. In Rome, gladiators did fight lions. Sometimes they were given spears, tridents, or swords. The fight was brutal, dangerous, but it made for good spectacle. On the other hand, criminals sentenced to damnatio ad bestias were offered no weapons, no chance at survival. They were simply entertainment, their deaths a reminder of Rome's authority. The bones offer some tantalizing hints. There were no clear signs of shackles, no evidence of prolonged malnutrition. He was young, healthy, strong, at least before the lion. Some researchers suggest this points more toward a gladiator than a condemned man. After all, gladiators were often kept in good physical condition to maximize the spectacle. Still, we cannot be sure. What we can imagine, though, is the moment itself. The gates creak. The crowd leans forward, anticipation sharp in the air. The man stands, perhaps gripping a weapon, perhaps barehanded. Across the sand, a lion bursts forth, its roar drowning out the crowd. For a few heartbeats, it's a contest, man against beast, will against instinct. And then, in a blur of movement, it ends. The lion's jaws close, the man screams, the crowd erupts. His bones, buried for centuries, carry the memory of that moment, a memory of terror, of violence, of spectacle. And when they were uncovered in York, they brought the arena back to life for just a moment, letting us glimpse the raw brutality of Roman entertainment at the edge of the empire. To understand why such a spectacle unfolded in York, we need to step back and look at the city itself. Roman York, known then as Eboracum, was no sleepy provincial town. It was one of the great outposts of Roman Britain, a military hub where legions gathered, emperors visited, and political power was concentrated. The city bustled with soldiers, merchants, slaves, and settlers from across the empire. Imagine the languages heard on its streets: Latin, Celtic dialects, perhaps even Greek or Punic from traders. And at the heart of this world stood the amphitheater. It wasn't Rome's Colosseum in scale, of course, but for the people of Eboracum, it was just as vital. A place of entertainment, unity, and power. Crowds of thousands would gather, their shouts echoing through stone. For the Romans, the games weren't just fun, they were a performance of authority. Each spectacle reminded the audience of Rome's control over enemies, over life and death, even over nature itself. A lion from Africa standing in a Yorkshire arena was proof that the empire's reach extended across seas and deserts. It was propaganda carved into flesh and bone. So when the lion tore into the man, when the crowd cheered, they weren't just watching a fight, they were watching Rome itself, reaffirmed in blood. There's another layer to this story, though. By the 3rd century, the Roman Empire was changing. The games still dazzled crowds, but they were increasingly criticized by philosophers and religious leaders. Early Christians, in particular, condemned the arena as a place of cruelty and sin. Some even became victims themselves, thrown to the beasts for refusing to renounce their faith. Could our man from York have been one of them, a Christian martyr, executed by lion to satisfy both justice and spectacle? It's possible. Britain did have Christian communities by the 3rd century. Archaeological traces suggest small groups practicing their faith quietly in cities like York. Still, we must be careful. There's no direct evidence linking this skeleton to Christian persecution, but the possibility lingers, adding another haunting dimension. What's certain is that the games, once symbols of Roman pride, eventually became symbols of its excess and decline. As the empire weakened, resources dwindled. Importing lions, elephants, and exotic animals grew harder, more expensive. By the late 4th century, the great beast hunts had faded, the amphitheaters crumbled, the cheers fell silent. And in York, the skeleton of the man bitten by lions lay buried, forgotten, waiting centuries for rediscovery. The skeleton from York is more than just a set of bones. It is a voice from the past, a testimony etched into calcium and marrow. It tells us that lions roamed not only the savannas of Africa, but the sand-floored arenas of Britain. It tells us that Roman cruelty, ambition, and thirst for spectacle stretched even to the damp frontiers of their empire. It also tells us about human resilience. This man, whoever he was, a gladiator, a condemned criminal, a rebel, perhaps even a believer, stood in that arena, knowing the odds, knowing the roar of the beast would soon drown his heartbeat, and yet he faced it. That moment, preserved in bone, is a reminder of how individuals are swept into the machinery of empire, used for entertainment, then discarded. Archaeology gives us glimpses of stories long buried, but it also gives us perspective. Today, we recoil at the idea of watching a man torn apart by a lion. Yet, in Roman York, that same act was celebrated, applauded, even demanded. What will future generations think of our entertainments, our spectacles, our cruelties? The story of the gladiator bitten by lions in 3rd century York is not just about one man's death. It's about empire and power, about how societies choose to entertain themselves, about what they value and what they sacrifice. In the end, his bones remind us of both the grandeur and the brutality of Rome. They remind us that history is not abstract. It is written in flesh, in blood, in the silent testimony of skeletons pulled from the earth. And perhaps that is why this discovery resonates so deeply. Because when we look at those lion-bitten bones, we aren't just seeing the past. We're seeing ourselves, our fascination with violence, our hunger for spectacle, our struggle between cruelty and compassion. The man in York's arena died nearly 2 millennia ago, but his story lives on, roaring across the centuries, a reminder that history is never truly silent. So next time you walk the quiet streets of York, imagine beneath your feet the roar of a crowd, the growl of a lion, and the cry of a man who became part of Rome's dark theater. What do you think? Was he a rebel, a condemned man, or a gladiator who dared to face the lion? Let us know your theories in the comments. And if you enjoyed traveling back with us today, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, because the past is never truly gone as long as we keep its stories alive.